and welcome everybody. And thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for our Livable Future Live event. It's hard to believe that we are already at the end of the year, that this is our last event of 2023. But we're just so glad that so many of you have joined us for these events throughout the year. So thank you for being here for this one today. My name is Kate Schwanhauser, and I'm the events manager here, and I'm the host of this monthly Livable Future Live event series. And today we've got a great conversation ahead of us. We are going to be spending some time really looking back at some of the major events from this past year, both the highs and the lows, the lessons that we've learned, and how some really important wins from this year have set us up for the year ahead. And, we know there's a lot on the horizon, especially given the 2024 election. So we'll be digging into that a little bit too. We'll give people just another minute to keep getting logged in. And in the meantime, I've just got a couple of quick reminders and some announcements to share with all of you. So first, if you would like to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, just go ahead and click on the Show Captions button in your Zoom toolbar, and those will turn on for you. You can also keep using the chat today as a space to share your thoughts and have a conversation with all of the other fellow attendees here with us today. And we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as you're listening, please just go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box. And finally, we are recording today's event, and I'll be sharing that later with everybody. So just keep an eye out for an email from me later this week. All right, so today's conversation is really going to give you just a great picture of the work that Food and Water Watch and our members like all of you are doing. But I still just want to start with a quick overview of who we are for those of you who might be new here. So Food and Water Watch is a national organization fighting for sustainable food, clean water, and a livable climate for all of us. And we do this by mobilizing grassroots activists to build political power at all levels of government. So that means, we're working on federal legislation that would bring sweeping change to food, water, and climate policy. And we also have organizers who are working on the ground in states across the country on issues that are impacting local communities. And today we are going to hear from a range of our staff who are working on a number of these different issues. And, I have to say that it really truly is all of you here today who power this work. And right now, I know that many of us are making decisions about the organizations and causes that will be supporting this giving season. So I hope that you will consider including Food and Water Watch in your giving plans this year. And thanks to a generous donor, we have a special matching gift opportunity. So any gift that you make today will be matched 4 to 1. So that's 5 times the impact on our 2024 campaigns. That's huge. And Food and Water Watch doesn't take any corporate funding. We are powered by generous people like all of you who love our planet. So please do consider making a tax-deductible gift to Food and Water Watch this holiday season and really strengthen our fights to protect our food, water, and climate. So you can do that and take advantage of this special match by texting the word gift to the number 23321, or you can click on the link that we'll put in the chat. And I will be sharing more of our 2024 event lineup soon. We'll have some great event opportunities for all of you. But in the meantime, I would like to invite you to join us for our first event of the new year on January 23rd. We'll be hosting a special author talk with Jake Biddle, who is the author of the book, The Great Displacement, which looks at climate migration and how climate change is impacting the geography of the United States. And this book was our executive director, Winona Howder's Book of the Year selection. And so in January, they'll be sitting down together to discuss it. And we'll put a link in the chat where you can sign up to join us for that conversation. And finally, I just have one final ask for you all here. We all are impacted in different ways by the threats that our food, water, and climate face. And we just think it's really important that we share our stories so that others know that they're not alone. Stories can really help build connections. They can inspire other people to join us in this fight and really grow this movement. And they just illustrate all of the different ways that we're all doing our part. So we would love to hear from you. I would love for you to share your story with us. And if you would be willing to share your experiences, whether they're related to food, water, climate, different actions that you're taking, please let us know. We'll put a form in the chat where you can do that. So thank you for considering sharing your story with us. All right, so let's go ahead and get to it. We had a similar conversation on today's topic just a few weeks ago at our Against All Odds annual benefit during our virtual conference. And because this was such an important topic and so many people really wanted to hear more, we decided to revisit it today and go into even more detail. You know, we know that 2024 is going to be an incredibly important year for our democracy, for our climate. And so we just wanted to take some time to really reflect and assess where we are, some of the major things that happened, and how together with the support of all of our members like you here today, we can really build on this in 2024. So if you are interested in hearing more of our previous conversation that we had in October, or hear from some of our other guest speakers at Against All Odds, we'll put a link in the chat where you can watch that. But for now, back by popular demand, let me introduce Mitch Jones, who is Food and Water Watch's Managing Director of Policy and Litigation. And he's here today to really talk with us about the big picture and what's on the horizon in 2024. So hi, Mitch. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to have this conversation yet again. It's important.
Exactly. So yeah, let's just get right to it. We'll start with a recap of what happened this year at the federal level, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Do you have anywhere that you would like to start?
Well, I'm usually let's do the bad news first and get out of the way so we can finish on a high note sort of person. So let's do that.
Let's do that. Yeah, let's get it out of the way. So, you know, where did we face challenges and setbacks in this past year?
Well, there've been a few. I think the biggest one really was the Biden administration approving the massive Willow project in Alaska. This is an oil drilling project that would create as much pollution as adding 2 million additional gas-powered cars to our highways. So, we were all disappointed and angry when the administration approved the project. But instead of just sitting on our anger, obviously, we let the administration know about it. We helped lead the groundswell of opposition to the decision by organizing on the ground across the country. And it's become clear to us since then that the administration actually did note the anger of the climate movement, and the pushback is working. We know that they're worried about their standing with the climate movement, especially with the off fossil fuels part of the climate movement, those of us who actually want to end fossil fuels and keep it in the ground. We know that they're worried about their standing with basically our part of the climate movement, the one that we pioneered when we became the first organization to call for a ban on fracking everywhere. So the reaction, we're not getting everything we want. It's politics. You rarely do. You got to ask for what you want and push people. And we're pushing. We've seen some improvement. We've seen some measure of a reluctance to continue to just approve these projects and approve drilling at the rate that they've been doing. And we know that that's because the Biden administration is hearing from people on the ground. They're hearing from their constituents, and we know that this works. We know organizing works, and we really just have to keep that up. The pressure is working. Another example of a real, I don't know if I'd call it a setback, but a bit of a tragedy was the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, which my colleague Megan is going to talk about more in a few moments. But this was a perfectly preventable tragedy. It's horrific that this happened, but it did lead to action. And we helped generate a really vocal and powerful movement that's calling for stronger regulations that will protect communities from these sorts of accidents in the future. Another one that just popped up this past week, a couple days ago, is we're now producing domestic oil at a record high, which is the exact opposite of what our climate needs. Now, this isn't all due to the policies of the current administration. Some of it dates back to decisions made over a decade ago. But we got to be clear that the administration has been issuing those drilling permits hand over fist. So they deserve some of the blame. And certainly the pushback that the movement has been giving them is well deserved. And like I said, we are starting to see some pulling back from that stance from them. Setbacks are unfortunately just reality. It's a really tough political climate. We have this closely divided, chaotic, do-nothing Congress. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't lose hope.
Exactly. And, despite these setbacks, like you started to mention some of this, there's always something that we can learn as well. So is there anything that we've taken away from these challenges that we can use as lessons to help us overcome similar ones that, realistically will likely face again in the future?
Well, we didn't learn this one, but we've known it all along, but it just reiterates the importance of organizing, right? The impact that constituents calling and meeting, especially meeting with their members of Congress, is huge. And this past year, our staff and our volunteer team held over 260 meetings with congressional offices to educate them and to push for our policies. And our volunteer network mobilized almost 16,000 calls to elected officials up and down the spectrum, from the federal government down to local governments across the country. We know this grassroots activism works. Our work is a testament to that, and we're going to continue to do that. The other thing that really has been reinforced to me is, somebody who's worked as a lobbyist on Capitol Hill, is developing really strong relationships and building champions and allies in Congress who are willing to stand up when industry comes in, or when politicians who frankly are bought or paid for by the industry want to push bad policies. We've been working with people like Senator Cory Booker and Representative Ro Khanna on the Farm System Reform Act, and also on trying to get good policies into the Farm Bill. We've worked with Senator Elizabeth Warren on trying to tackle corporate monopolies. We're working with Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman and Senator Bernie Sanders to promote the Water Act. And we've worked with Representative Jan Schakowsky on the Future Generation Protection Act, which would ban fracking and LNG exports, and many others. So that's important, to develop those relationships and build those champions who are willing to speak out as well. Look, I always say this is politics, right? It's politics. We don't control the calendar of when things are going to happen. So what's really important for this work is to be ready to take advantage of the moments that do arise, and they do arise now and again. But we also have to work to make sure that those moments happen. And we do that by building more champions in elected office up and down all layers of government. And we do that by organizing across the country to get people to talk to their elected officials and pressure them to take the right positions.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, that's why, our volunteer network is so important, because it really lets us respond rapidly when those situations arise, and just really make sure that we are getting our message across to our elected officials. So, I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but I think people power truly is our superpower. So, if you're interested in joining our volunteer network, I highly encourage you to do so. We'll put a link for you in the chat. We have volunteer hubs in multiple states, as well as a national volunteer network, so that you can volunteer with us no matter where you live. All right, so next, Mitch, it's not all bad news. We definitely saw some important progress on legislation this year. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And I just want to reiterate the importance of what you just said about the volunteer network. That is such a vital component of the work that we can do to build strength and actually move these issues forward. But, we've seen in the current Congress, which, like I said, chaotic. It's been chaotic. I've never seen anything like this before. But we've reintroduced the Water Act, which I mentioned earlier, which is actually the most far-reaching, expansive attempt to address our water crisis in this country that's ever been introduced. As of today, there are 88 co-sponsors in the House. And I was looking through that list of co-sponsors, and it really struck me when we first introduced that bill, it was really kind of a niche progressive bill. We had a couple moderates on it, but it was really a progressive bill. That's not the case anymore. We have co-sponsors from all across the Democratic caucus. And I think what we've demonstrated is we're building, slowly but surely, building this bill to become kind of the standard approach to addressing the water crisis within the Democratic Party. And that's going to be key for our ability to move the bill in the future. We're making progress. We're building momentum. We're going to be ready to move when the opportunity arises. There was a little bit of good news this year when it comes to PFAS, the forever chemicals. The EPA, for the first time ever, proposed enforceable limits on 6 types of PFAS in drinking water. Now, we know this isn't enough. We're pushing for basically a zero limit on all PFAS in drinking water. But I'm going to give you a little bit of scoop. I'm not going to tell you who's doing it, but there's going to be a really strong PFAS bill introduced in Congress tomorrow. And it's a good opportunity for us to continue to use that legislation to educate members and really begin to build the power we need to take on this issue. And obviously we're working hard on the farm bill. It did get extended for another year. We're working hard to reform our food system. And, to that end, I'd like for us to share now a video of Senator Cory Booker for when we spoke at our Against All Odds conference about the partnership that we have with his office on the Farm System Reform Act. So let's watch that now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today at the Against All Odds conference. I joined the Senate Agricultural Committee last Congress because I saw that our agricultural system is important, urgently so, not just for access to the food we all need to thrive, but it's also important because it is intertwined with climate, the health of our environment, and our physical health. We have a big opportunity to make progress in improving soil health, water quality, the treatment of workers, access to healthy, nutrient-dense foods, and many other justice issues in the Farm Bill. I'm proud to work with Food and Water Watch on building support for my Farm System Reform Act, which would stop the construction of new factory farms, phase out existing factory farms, and provide funding for farmers who want to transition to more sustainable and humane farming practices that make their lives better, improve the conditions for animals, improve our soil, improve our environment, improve our nation. You all have been extraordinary partners on legislation for land conservation programs and protecting farmers' ability to continue on their own farmland. We're losing too many of our American farmers. With the bills that we've been working on and many more of your great ideas, I have more confidence than ever that we can make real progress to shift our food system from one that only benefits these massive, concentrated agro-businesses to one that is regenerative and just, that supports our communities, supports our farmers, and supports our well-being. You all are at the front lines of this movement that's growing around our country. People are growing in consciousness, growing in conviction, growing in the determination to reclaim our American heritage and our values. I can't do this work. None of this would be accomplished without dedicated foot soldiers for justice, change makers like you. It's so important that you continue the work. Your voice, your activism, your leadership, your light working, all of this, I believe, will help us to achieve a fair food system, more just, more abundant. Together, we can make real progress. I know what our future holds. I know we are not destined towards sickness. I know we're not destined towards the destruction of our soil and our environment. I know that farmers are the ones that can help us lead our way out of the crises that we see. I know that people together creating coalitions, from healthcare professionals to farmers, from environmental activists to people who believe that we can have farm systems that treat animals humanely, all of us together, we can make this a victory for Americans and America. Thank you, everyone, for what you do. You inspire me in my work, and I am so proud to be in partnership with you.
So, Cory Booker is always inspiring, and it's been great to develop the relationship with him we have working on agricultural issues over the past several years. We need champions like Cory Booker, and as he said, we need volunteers and supporters doing this work to help move these policies forward. And the last thing I'll say here, Kate, is just, we're also making some progress on building champions and educating people who oppose false climate solutions like carbon capture and sequestration, which is used, almost all of that is used for enhanced oil recovery. So you're using carbon dioxide to drill more oil. It's a crazy scheme that we've been opposing, and we've been educating people on it. And the same goes for factory farm gas, where we're taking these concentrated feeding operations and then trying to turn the manure into part of the electrical system so that we become even more reliant on them. We are making progress on these issues, but obviously we have more work to do in 2024.
Definitely, but we're ready for it. Switching gears just a little bit, because I know that this is something that's on everybody's mind. 2024, it's a big election year. There's a lot at stake. Yeah. What are you on the lookout for in this upcoming election season?
Well, I think that what we're going to see in this election season, we're going to see a lot of issues we talked about. But if you look back at 2016, climate change was hardly even an issue. When we first called for a ban on national fracking over a decade ago, it played virtually no role in elections, right? And anytime it was mentioned, it was just kind of lip service, right? But since then, we've seen the issue become much more central to electoral campaigns, first in the Democratic primaries, and then later also in general elections. If you look back to 2020, the main Democratic candidates tried to take claim for having the most aggressive climate plans. Some of them even wanted to actually take on the fossil fuel industry. And in that general election, climate change and fracking in particular became a real issue between Trump and Biden. I think we're going to continue to see that be the case going into 2024 for elections up and down the ballot. It's a big issue. It's a huge issue. It's an important issue, especially for younger voters. I know my child, who's not quite old enough to vote next year, has been very concerned about it and was upset about Willow. I do think that's going to be one of the big issues that we're going to see come up in the next election.
Great. I'm glad to hear it'll be front and center, as it should be.
It should be.
So, Mitch, we've talked a little bit about this before too, just in general, the fact that it's an election year, and particularly a presidential election year, can oftentimes mean that we see efforts to actually pass legislation kind of grind to a halt. We know this, we expect this, which is why Food and Water Watch doesn't just work at the federal level, but we also have these campaigns in local communities in dozens of states across the country. So I have a two-part question for you. First, is there anything at the federal level that you do expect to see movement on next year? And second, whether yes or no, why is it so important that we maintain this focus on local and state work, whether or not it's an election year?
So, there are certain bills that do need to pass. The question is, does that happen before or after Election Day? As I mentioned briefly a minute ago, Congress extended the Farm Bill for 1 year, so we're still going to be working on that, potentially up and through September of next year. That's going to need to pass, and it would be good if the Farm Bill actually could move, and we're going to continue working with our allies like Senator Booker and Congressman Khanna on this. Unfortunately, negotiations seem to be at a standstill at the moment because they're still trying to figure out how to fund the current fiscal year. But there is going to still be time for them to move the Farm Bill, and then once they finish the 2024 spending bills, they're going to have to immediately turn around to work on the 2025 bills. Now, I'm not predicting that, or I am predicting that those probably won't pass until after the election, but we have to do work on there to make sure that there aren't drastic cuts to important programs like water utility funding, that there aren't bad policy riders like preventing the Department of Agriculture from enforcing certain regulations that restrict these monolithic agricultural corporations, in which they're trying to push for this year, but which we have defeated. But beyond that, it's an election year, chaotic Congress, a House with a majority that can't function. So I'm not expecting a whole lot to happen beyond that. Your second one, why is it important to maintain a focus on local work? Well, precisely because of that. Like, look, we know in order to make the far-reaching changes that we need, that are necessary, we have to pass federal legislation. We have to do federal regulation, but that takes time. And so we also have to work at the state and local level because look, working at the local level can help build momentum to improve state policy. Working on state policy can build momentum to improve federal policy. So we have to build these campaigns in such a way that we're working our way up to the point where we can get to that end goal. So it's vitally important that we work at the local and state level to support local communities with issues that are directly impacting them, like the East Palestine train derailment, but also to change policy at these levels so that that ripple effect can work out to have those broader changes that we need across whether it's our water systems, our food system, or our energy system.
Great, thank you. So what I'd actually like to do now is kind of go on a little cross-country tour with some of our other staff members to hear about some of these local and state victories that we've had and just how we're building this sort of ripple effect that you were just mentioning, Mitch. So Mitch, we will be coming back to you at the end. So if anyone listening has questions for Mitch, please go ahead and start putting those in the Q&A box and we'll circle back to those at the end. But for now, let's start our tour with Alex Beecham, who is our Northeast Region Director. And we are going to hear from Alex a little bit more about a landmark victory that we had in New York to ban gas in all new buildings statewide. So hi, Alex. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, I'll let you tell people about the amazing victory that your team had in New York.
Yeah, definitely. So as Kate just mentioned, I'm Alex. I'm the Northeast Region Director based in our Brooklyn office. We had really exciting victory this year, banning gas in all new buildings statewide. So, this is, oh, great, thanks. This is a thing people don't know, but at least in New York, and I think in a lot of Northeast states, buildings are the single biggest source of emissions. So people tend to think of power plants or transportation or whatever, but in New York, more greenhouse gas emissions are coming from our buildings than any other single source. So we saw this as a really solvable problem because technically this is really easy. Like we know how to electrify buildings, really, really simple to do. And the easiest, even easier than that, is changing new buildings so that we're not making the problem worse year after year after year. So the idea was like, let's make every new building in New York all electric so that we're not adding more and more gas infrastructure at a time when we should be, racing the other direction. So the idea, maybe to Mitch's point at the end there, of taking it like local and then up, it seemed like the easiest way to do this was to do it first in New York City. So several years back, we won that. It's been on my mind a lot. So because it goes into effect January 1, so in a couple of weeks, but we won it back in 2021 after a really long, hard-fought campaign pushing at the grassroots level. Council passed it, then Mayor de Blasio signed it into law right before leaving office. And then right after that, we thought, okay, we did that at the city. You could do the same thing statewide, and all we'd need to do is pass a bill through the legislature and get it signed by the governor. So we went kind of immediately into that, I guess, a year ago or 2 years ago. And over those 2 years, built a really strong coalition. So you had, I think importantly, a bunch of groups with real field capacity. So sometimes in this work, people just build a big coalition of names. These are people who could get real bodies in the streets, who could get people to rallies in Albany, who could do the kind of grinding field work that it takes to win and that we think we're particularly good at Food and Water Watch. So you had that coalition. We also had a clear target from the beginning. So I won't bore you with New York budget politics, but for a whole bunch of reasons, it made sense to do this in the budget. To do that, you first need the governor to put it in her budget, and then you need each house to agree and to pass it in their budgets, and then they get in a room somewhere and hash it out, right? So right away, we ran a really big campaign targeting Kathy Hochul really aggressively. This photo here is one of many, many, many bird dog actions where we tried to have rallies outside every one of her public events to keep the issue sort of front and center for her. And then after that, after we got it in her budget, we pivoted immediately to a really big campaign targeting leadership in both houses, and doing that by getting their members to go to them and say, this is a big deal. This is the climate bill we've got to pass this year. And brought a lot of people to Albany a whole bunch of times. So this photo here is a bunch of people on the $1 Million Staircase, which is this like grand MC Escher looking thing in New York's Capitol. So, that is what it took. And I think, to me, this is a really clear people power story, right? It really was like our people versus the industry's money. The other side spent millions of dollars on this, largely propped up by the oil and gas industry and the propane guys, flooding the airwaves, doing a bunch of lobbying in Albany. But what they can't do is this kind of stuff that you're seeing here, right? Like, there aren't people calling for gas to stay, right? Those people don't exist. It's largely an insider strategy from the oil and gas guys. So we were able to get enough people to make that people power overcome their money, and ultimately to win it in the budget, and then to get Governor Hochul to sign the thing into law. So yeah, I think for us, this is exciting in its own right? Like, this is a huge amount of gas that won't be burned. It also, though, is kind of like important symbolically, right? So, or important as a model. Symbolically is probably the wrong word, but as a model for other states, other cities to follow. So before New York did this, a bunch of cities around the country had done it, largely on the West Coast. New York is a big deal because we could do it statewide, also because New York's a cold weather state. And so you're just talking about way, way, way more gas, right? There's a sort of right-wing hysteria about gas stoves. That's a tiny percentage, right? Most of the gas we're burning in our buildings is about heat, not about stoves. So that's a big deal, demonstrating that viability of the cold weather state. And we're already seeing others begin to follow suit. So we haven't had another state pass it yet, but there's a big, big effort in Illinois this year to get it done. There's big efforts in Massachusetts to get it done. And then there's cities in a whole bunch of cold weather states that are following New York City's lead. So that's really exciting. And then we've long had a kind of friendly competition with California. On many environmental issues, California is way, way ahead of where we are in New York. On this stuff, on the supply side of fossil fuels, New York has led the way in a bunch of ways, going all the way back to banning fracking almost a decade ago. And I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. But anyway, we want to play that up and have the two states compete against each other and not sort of hold themselves up as, the comparison shouldn't be like New York or whatever red state, or New York versus the federal government doing nothing. We want both states to like feel the pressure and keep doing more and more and more. So that is the scoop, I guess.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And I just want to give a shout out. I'm sure we have lots of New York volunteers on this call today who were really involved in this campaign. So thank you for all the hard work that you put into this as well. Before I let you go, Alex, just one question for you. So, looking ahead to 2024, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities to continue to make really big, bold progress in New York?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of stuff we're doing in 2024, but I think the big next step for us is dealing with existing buildings. So all of this stuff, right, that I just talked about was banning gas in new buildings. That's exciting. We're obviously burning an enormous amount of gas in our buildings right now and need kind of a phased, intelligent drawdown of all that stuff. So there's a bunch of policy things that will get us there. The thing that's really on the agenda this session, though, is the New York Heat Act, which does a lot of things. The two most exciting ones are it closes a whole bunch of subsidies that are right now going to expanding natural gas infrastructure and getting more gas into buildings. And it's not just that we don't want more gas. Ratepayer dollars, our money is going to it right now, and you don't even see it. It's not on your gas bill. We're just all paying for it, and paying for it in a really, really regressive manner, because ratepayer dollars are way more regressive than tax dollars. So it closes that. That's exciting, and I think would slow the growth of gas and incentivize more buildings to move to all electric, or do weatherization, other steps that would burn less gas. So that's exciting. At the same time, it also really addresses the affordability crisis. So there's a 6% cap, meaning like no one would pay over 6% of their income in their energy bills. Marrying those two things together is, I think, really important from a kind of moral and a policy perspective. It's also really important politically, right? We know that this year, the last couple years, right, there's been a kind of hyper focus on inflation. And I think that we're going to see, and already are seeing, a big backlash on the other side about rates. So this allows us to go on the offensive to say, like, look, we can do both at the same time. We can address affordability and move off fossil fuels. So that's really exciting. And I think is one of the reasons the bill has so much support. So that's been a fun thing to see. And we're close. It passed one house last year. It's the same kind of thing. We should be able to get it done in the budget, but it's going to be a huge, huge fight.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing what 2024 brings. So now I would like everyone to please join me in welcoming Tara Heinzen, who is Food and Water Watch's legal director. And for those who don't know, Food and Water Watch is really unique in that in addition to all of the on-the-ground organizing we do, like you just heard about in New York, we also have an incredible legal team here that takes on the corporations for the harm that they're doing and puts pressure on agencies like the EPA to uphold and strengthen regulations that protect our food, water, and climate. So Tara, you and your team have been very busy this year, and it's really paid off. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the legal victories we've had in 2023?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks, Kate. We've had a really big year in the courts, and mostly with wins that are going to help us advance our fight to ban factory farms. So as you heard from Senator Booker, I won't try to top him. It's imperative that we completely change our food system and ban factory farms. But we also dedicate a lot of legal resources to fighting existing factory farms, and we do it for a couple of reasons. First, people are suffering from pollution and other harms of this industry right now, and we can't ignore that. And second, we also understand that the government's failure to regulate this pollution has played a really big role in enabling factory farming to take over livestock production, pushing family farmers off the land. So this work is getting us closer to that ban that we need. This is, of course, a really long-term fight, but we did make real progress this year on clean water in particular. So I'm going to focus there and then hit a couple other highlights. So first, we were able to successfully sue the Environmental Protection Agency this year over its weak water pollution standards for factory farms. EPA regulates all kinds of water polluters through nationwide standards. I won't get into the details, but the standards for factory farms are incredibly outdated. They're incredibly inadequate to protecting water quality. So we sued when EPA decided not to update them. EPA said they're good enough. We said, no, they're not. In response, this year, EPA decided to start a nationwide study of the whole sector's water pollution. This is a big win because this kind of study is often a first step towards strengthening the pollution rules, and it creates a public process that we'll be able to engage in to make sure it's done as well as possible. That'll be ongoing for the next 2 years or so. We also won a similar lawsuit this year with coalition partners challenging EPA's equally outdated and weak pollution standards for slaughterhouses, which are another sector responsible for some of the most water pollution in the country. The settlement we reached requires EPA actually to propose a new rule to strengthen these requirements today. So rulemaking is starting right now, and we'll be very involved in it. Last but not least, on the clean water front, we've been building on a major court win from 2021. In that case, we won a challenge to an EPA statewide pollution permit for factory farms in Idaho. This permit, like pretty much all factory farm permits, lacked the pollution monitoring requirements that are really key to knowing when a facility is violating the Clean Water Act, and equally important to holding a violator accountable. Giving factory farms special treatment by not requiring monitoring has allowed a lot of their illegal pollution to fly under the radar across the country for decades. In this case, we were able to set a federal court of appeals precedent. So that means this decision actually carries significant weight. And we're now working to get that decision implemented in state-issued permits across the country. One of the first opportunities we had to do that was a challenge to Colorado's permit, which didn't require monitoring for groundwater contamination. And this year we won that case. We struck down the permit, and now that case is on appeal. We expect to win again. And in the meantime, we are filing other challenges to other state permits, including Washington State, and one that I can't talk about yet that we're filing this Friday. So before I wrap up, I do want to touch on a couple other wins that are not as related to water pollution. In one case, we worked with a few partners to strike down an illegal US Department of Agriculture rule that eliminated a requirement for USDA to look at and consider the environmental impacts before financing so-called medium-sized factory farms. This kind of environmental review is often the only way that impacted communities find out a factory farm is coming to the neighborhood at all. And this rule would have meant that thousands of communities would be kept in the dark until it's too late. Now, thanks to this win, USDA has to reinstate the public notice requirement and actually consider the environmental harms of bankrolling this industry with our tax dollars. We even had, this might be surprising, a couple of wins in the Supreme Court of all places this year, when first it declined to review a coalition win we were a part of challenging North Carolina's ag-gag law, which was a law criminalizing free speech activity that can expose cruelty and other illegal activities on factory farms. And second, when the Supreme Court upheld California's Prop 12 animal welfare law, which we had helped support in a friend of the court brief. A lot of this work is ongoing, and we're hoping to keep the victories coming this next year. For example, by continuing our fight for clean water and to hold EPA accountable for its weak factory farm and slaughterhouse regulations, expanding on our winning playbook with regard to pollution monitoring, and continuing to challenge ag-gag laws when they come up, including one in Iowa that we've defeated in district court and now are fighting on appeal from the state. So I think those are the highlights.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. It's great to hear that amazing overview. I have one quick question for you. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have this really unique combination of organizing and legal work. So can you explain a little bit more about that theory and how our legal work complements the on-the-ground organizing campaigns that we're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's unique. So today I focused on some of our litigation wins that are really aimed at winning broad systemic change in the courts. And often these cases can have significant impact to, reduce pollution, improve quality of life on their own, but they can also help to open new doors for our organizing work. So for example, with the pollution monitoring work, we might be able to get pollution monitoring data for factory farms that didn't exist before, that then can be used by our policy colleagues and organizing colleagues to support our fights for moratoria and bans at the state and federal level. But we also incorporate legal work, analysis, research, legal tactics, and strategies directly into our grassroots organizing campaigns. This work can help us to advance our campaign's public narrative. It can help us engage our membership. It can also help us, slow or stop the harmful projects that we're fighting. And one recent example I want to highlight is in our Oregon campaign for a moratorium on factory farms in the state. We're part of and helping to lead a really great coalition here in Oregon that uses a lot of legal strategies hand in hand with our grassroots organizing work. And this year we were successful in passing a factory farm reform bill at the state level that's going to increase local control over the siting of factory farms and also improve water quality protections statewide. And this is really timely because just yesterday, the first Oregon county used its brand new siting authority to enact factory farm setbacks of 1 mile from property lines, which is a huge win for our friends in Lynn County, Oregon. And we'll be continuing to kind of partner that legal and organizing work going forward to support our organizers and our coalition partners to make sure that more counties use that authority and do the same. And that can have a huge role in limiting the expansion of factory farms in the state. So I do think this approach really makes our legal work unique and effective.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. I really appreciate you sharing that overview and looking forward to where we take things in the new year. All right. So last but not least on our tour, we are going to head over to Pennsylvania to hear from Megan McDonough, who is our Pennsylvania State Director. Megan couldn't be here with us live today, so she and I actually sat down yesterday together to have this chat. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. It has been a very busy year here in Pennsylvania and the Ohio River Valley as a whole. And I thank you for the time to talk a little bit more about Pennsylvania and all the work that's happening here. We started the year off completely blindsided by a public health nightmare that we certainly weren't anticipating. Where I live, just a little south of Pittsburgh, is just an hour away from East Palestine, Ohio, where the Norfolk Southern train derailed and caused a public health crisis due to the toxic chemicals on board the train and the subsequent burn of those chemicals. Food and Water Watch immediately jumped into action, and along with our allies at Clean Air Council and Earthworks, we assisted with supply drives for impacted residents. We helped secure water, soil, and indoor surface testing through our good friend Jill Hunkler and her university partners. We were also able to install air monitors we received from our partners at Protect Elizabeth Township. And we installed those at strategic locations during the cleanup efforts to ensure that residents had real-time data that they could access and use to advocate for themselves effectively. And since then, we've been working tirelessly alongside our allies at Beyond Plastics to call for a ban on vinyl chloride. We're really hopeful that the EPA is finally hearing that call and will be working towards new rulemaking on vinyl chloride. Additionally, we have also been pushing state and federal regulators to put stronger restrictions in place on trains that carry these dangerous chemicals that will prevent disasters like this from happening again, because they're long overdue. With the expansion of our PA team, we were fortunate enough to be able to take on a larger role in the Shell Accountability Campaign. The Shell ethane cracker plant opened in 2022 with its primary purpose to create up to 3.5 billion tons of plastic pellets every year. Most of them will be used to make single-use plastic products, which will feed into our much larger plastic pollution problem. And while it's creating these, it's releasing unbelievable amounts of pollution into the air. For example, Shell's permit allows them to emit up to 516 tons of VOCs for any 12-month period. But in reality, it released 510 tons, almost the entire permit amount in just 1 month alone. We were not about to let that stand. So we've taken a larger role in the Shell Accountability Campaign to organize residents against this injustice. And in May of this year, Shell was actually forced to pay $10 million for their violations. And half of that fund will go towards environmental projects in the county. But we know this isn't enough, and we plan to take larger action in 2024 to hold Shell truly accountable and explore avenues that may be able to shut their doors for good. Across the state, we've had wins. In eastern Pennsylvania, we stopped a hydrogen power plant proposal. And as many may know, this year was a really exciting year in western Pennsylvania as well. Our team has been working on the ground passing ordinances that protect communities from the fracking industry for the last 5 years in Allegheny County. Last year, we were able to bootstrap that local level work to a countywide initiative to ban fracking in our county parks and build a true movement in this region. And we now have a new ally in leadership, Sarah Anamarato, who won her election to county executive earlier this year. But Sarah's win goes beyond just having an ally in a position of power. This win helps solidify that we've been changing the narrative in this region on fracking and environmental issues. And it really proves that candidates with a climate platform can win in an area formerly dominated by the fossil fuel industry. And I truly believe that this win will reshape Allegheny County and the region for generations to come.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's just so great to hear all of the amazing work that you and your colleagues are doing in the region. And I know that so much of that is made possible by our incredible members and volunteers who contribute to this work. So I want to just ask you a question. You know, we've talked today about the ripple effect that some of these local victories can have on state and regional policy. And I think that the work that you're doing in Pennsylvania is such a great example of this. So can you talk about how what Food and Water Watch is doing in Pennsylvania really ripples out and affects all of us beyond just this region?
Of course. Listen, pollution and harm, especially air and water pollution, they don't recognize municipal or state lines. You know, just as a big example of this is the Shell ethane cracker plant. And that plant means an increased need for feedstock. Estimates say that at least 900 new fracking wells will be needed in order for it to meet its full operational demand. But then this also means that more trains, like the Norfolk Southern train carrying dangerous petrochemicals, would start traveling through communities between the Gulf Coast and facilities like this one here, endangering everyone along those routes. We already know the negative impact of fracking has had on the region, and even more of it would be disastrous. with the new threat of hydrogen hubs coming down the line here in Pennsylvania, the need for this work on the ground and taking that power built to stop even more dangerous buildouts is vital for all of us. You know, and even here in Allegheny County, we have some of the worst air in the nation. And when we fight back and when we win, we can help guide policy decisions in the right direction. You know, really moving away from benefiting corporations and finally giving the people a seat at the table that they've been without for far too long.
All right, big thank you to Megan for sharing that update on all the work that's being done in Pennsylvania, and just really reiterating what Mitch was talking about at the beginning of how some of these local and state victories and the work that we're doing can really kind of build out to impact the rest of the country. So, you know, there were so many other victories that you all made possible this year. I wish we had time to get into them all, but I know we've only got a couple minutes left. So we are going to come back to Mitch to talk a little bit more about 2024, answer some audience questions. And in the meantime, we do have a great roundup of our top 10 victories from this year. So we will put a link in the chat where you can check out some more of the incredible things that you made possible. So welcome back, Mitch. You know, as we just heard from a lot of our colleagues, we've had some really important wins this year, and we've gotten a great snapshot of what's next in their regions and on our legal docket. Can you just share a quick overview of what else is on the horizon for 2024?
Sure. Well, I mean, of course, we're going to keep stopping fossil fuel projects across the country. We're going to keep fighting the carbon capture scam that I mentioned earlier. We're going to keep fighting back against fossil fuels anywhere and everywhere that we can. There's this new preposterous scheme in New York, basically trying to undermine the fracking ban by using carbon dioxide to actually enhance methane recovery. We've already mobilized against that. We're going to continue to fight it. Out in California, there's going to be a huge fight over a piece of legislation that we helped pass that provides setbacks for oil and gas wells. It's a pretty aggressive bill. So of course the fossil fuel cartel is challenging it. They've already spent millions of dollars to get this ballot initiative on the referendum. They're already running ads on it. It's our understanding they're probably going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to try to overdo this law. It's going to be a huge fight, but we're going to be there to fight alongside Californians to defeat the referendum and to secure this important protection for people and their families. We're also going to continue to build out our Protect California Water campaign to crack down on industrial agriculture giants and the oil and gas industry that are misusing billions of dollars or gallons rather of water that are causing wells of local communities to dry up. We've got great research on this. It's going to be put into the chat, and I encourage everybody to check it out on our website. You know, we're going to also continue to fight against water privatization. We've been, you know, the whole time we've existed, we've been helping communities fight against the multinational water companies trying to take over their water. So of course, we're going to continue to do that. And look, I just want to say this type of work is truly made possible by all of you who are here today, our volunteers and members who so generously give their time and their money to Food and Water Watch. We are extremely grateful for your generosity. You know, the victories that you've just heard about from Alex and Tara and Megan, these are all thanks to you. And with your continued commitment, we'll continue to build on these in 2024. We have an ambitious agenda for 2024, but that's because it's what we need. The threats to our food, our water, and our climate are big and they're immediate. But as we've proven, they're solvable. It will take hard work, good strategy, people power, and organizing, research, and legal, but we can do it, and you make that possible. Now, as Kate mentioned at the beginning of our program, right now, any gift you make to Food and Water Watch will be matched 5 times the impact. So please consider making a gift today to help set us up for a strong year.
Thank you, Mitch. That was a great overview of all of the great work that we have ahead of us in 2024. And I also just want to give a big thank you to everyone who has already made a gift today or this holiday season to Food and Water Watch or this year to Food and Water Watch. We're just very grateful for your generosity. I want to take a couple of audience questions, and we've gotten a couple in the chat about the elections. And, you know, a general theme that I'm seeing is people are expressing worry and anxiety about what the election results could mean, potential for really damaging impacts on our climate and democracy, depending on the results of this election, which is a valid fear, I think. So, you know, how would you respond to that? You know, how worried should we be? What advice do you have for people to remain optimistic in this election season?
Well, look, we know that elections matter, and I'm just going to preface all of this with saying there are certain limits on what I can say about elections right now because we're Food and Water Watch, not Food and Water Action. Come to one of our events for Food and Water Action, I'll say more. So we know that elections matter, right? We're living with the chaotic outcome of the last election and the fact that very little can get done. So I would encourage people to do everything that you can do. Get your neighbors to vote, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, talk to your friends, go out and organize, knock on doors, do everything you can do to make sure that the outcome of the election is one that is hopeful. Again, trying to think of how I could put this, hopeful, not hurtful, right? We need to have people elected who are going to do the right thing. And in order to do that, we need to use every grassroots phone calls, texts, door knocking, letter writing. We have to do all of those things to make sure that people get out to vote in this election. We know they matter, and it's important that we all participate.
Awesome. Yeah. And I do think that, you know, just each of us getting involved is really what's most important. You know, us sharing our own passion for these issues with our family, with our neighbors, with other constituents in our districts, I think really does make a huge difference. So as Mitch said, any ways that you would like to get involved and get out the vote efforts with us next year, we would be very happy to have you. So I'm going to let's do one quick, another audience question before we wrap up here. So someone is asking, do you think that local races and ballot measures can sometimes get overlooked in the focus on congressional races and, of course, who will be our next president? But would you say those local races are just as important?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think we've seen that, you know, what Megan was just talking about with the outcome of the Allegheny County executive race, where Sarah Innamorato is a proven champion for the environment, a proven anti-fracking elected official who's going to make big changes in Allegheny County. These races are important. We have used local races elsewhere to move the ball on the outcomes of local races, I should say, to move the ball on our issues. We've, you know, given power to communities in places like New Jersey to determine what type of electricity they've had. We've defeated water privatizations. Local races are very important. They can make a real difference directly in the lives of the people in that community, but also, as we talked about early, building the momentum to get those policies up to higher and higher levels of our governments.
Awesome. Thank you. Before I let you go, just any final words from you, Mitch? Anything that you're looking forward to in 2024?
You know, I'm just looking forward to getting back from the holidays and getting back into it. We've got a lot of important work we've got to do. I want to just say thank you to everybody who's here today. Thank you to all of our supporters, members, donors. You know, we here can't do that work without you. And, you know, please, if you're not a member of the volunteer network and you have the time to do it, please consider joining.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll just do a couple of quick reminders before we close out here today, but just want to reiterate what Mitch said and thank you all so much for all of the support that you give to Food and Water Watch, whether that's volunteering, whether that's making a donation. I will just share one last time that we do have this match going on today so that your gift will have 5 times the impact. And it really is your support that allows us to take on these big, big fights. So thank you so much for that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I hope that you will join us again as we start off the new year with an author talk in January with Jake Biddle, who wrote the book, The Great Displacement. We'll be discussing climate migration in the US with him. And finally, later today, you will be receiving an automated email or text message asking you to submit feedback about today's event. Please leave a comment. We love hearing your thoughts. It helps us shape our programming for future events. And I will be sending out an email later this week with a link to the recording of today's discussion, along with some of the resources and articles that we've shared in the chat. So please feel free to share that with family, friends, colleagues, and invite others to get involved in this work. And that's all. Just want to thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for this discussion, for joining us throughout the year for this Livable Future Live event series. I hope that you all have a really wonderful afternoon and a wonderful happy holiday season. So thanks so much, and I will see you in the new year.